Welcome to the 2021 Tennessee Titans draft finale. In this video, I'm going to be covering everything draft related that didn't really warrant a full-length video. So we'll be taking a look at Racy McMath and Brady Breeze, who were Tennessee's last two picks. And then we're going to look at some of Tennessee's undrafted free agents, talking about whether or not they can make an impact. And I'm also going to be doing draft grades and pro comps, so a lot of good stuff here. So Racy McMath is kind of the definition of a raw prospect at the receiver position. He has the frame of a prototypical outside receiver, but he didn't really see much usage or production at LSU. At the Senior Bowl, he looked completely out of place. He wasn't able to create any separation in the one-on-ones, which Senior Bowl one-on-ones are pretty much created to make the receivers look good. But the fact that he ran in the 4.3s makes him someone worth taking a chance on day 3. He ran a really limited route tree at LSU, pretty much just curl routes and go routes, and he didn't really show much as far as a release package or technique or anything like that. Similar to Des Fitzpatrick, McMath doesn't have a lot of quickness to his game, but he's pretty good at sinking his hips and creating separation on curl routes. And he also had a lot of drops, so overall I think he's someone who will need a lot of development before he contributes. Ultimately, McMath is kind of a blank canvas, but you're not really getting guys on day 3 that are finished products, so I'm good with taking a chance on a lottery ticket that has some nice athletic traits. Brady Breeze is a safety with somewhat limited athletic upside, but a lot of experience at different positions in the secondary. He played mostly deep safety for Oregon, but also some slot and box safety, and he's sort of a tweener because I'm not sure that he has the speed to play single high safety, but he's not really big enough to play strong safety either. He's really physical when it comes to playing the run. He has no hesitation at all, but he's pretty reckless as a tackler and he takes a lot of poor angles. And you see this lack of control sometimes when he's trying to make plays on the ball and coverage as well, because he doesn't have a great sense of timing and a lot of times he makes contact before the ball gets to the receiver. He has really good coverage instincts, which a lot of times makes up for his lack of speed. On this play, Auburn runs a switch concept, which is essentially a rub route down the field. The number 2 receiver fakes a flat route to get Breeze to come up, and the number 1 receiver runs a quick post to try to create some traffic, which will free up the number 2 as he breaks vertically. But Breeze recognizes the double move about as early as possible and adjusts his angle so that he doesn't get stuck, and then he does a good job of forcing the receiver to the sideline without physically pushing him there. He also has really good eye discipline, and he does a nice job balancing reading the quarterback's eyes but not getting looked off or taken out of the play. Ultimately, I doubt Breeze turns into a major contributor on defense, but I know he was a big-time special teams guy at Oregon, so if you're getting someone in the 6th round that plays special teams and he's your 3rd or 4th safety, that's not bad at all. So moving next to the draft grades, and I want to preface this by saying that I think most people who give draft grades are too generous. For me, a C is average, so if I were to grade every pick by every team, the average grade would be a C. So starting off, Caleb Farley gets an A. The more I watch of him, I just think he's a top 5 talent in this draft class, and I think he's going to be really good if he's healthy. Dylan Radins, I'm going A-. It's the 4th year in a row that Tennessee is able to get someone who I viewed as a first-round talent in the 2nd round. I think right away he's going to be a good run blocker in Tennessee's scheme. There's a chance that he struggles a bit in pass protection early just because he didn't really face any high-level competition at North Dakota State, but he has all the tools to develop into a good pass blocker. I'm going with a B for Monty Rice, which really has nothing to do with him as a player. Receiver is just a way more valuable position and a way bigger need for Tennessee, but I think Rice gives the Titans a lot of flexibility with roster management at the linebacker position going forward, so I definitely don't hate the pick. Elijah Molden's a B+, and he's someone I was maybe a bit lower on than the consensus. A lot of places had him going in the 2nd round, which I just didn't really see it. But when you talk about end of the 3rd round for someone who could play slot corner really well and then maybe be the 3rd safety in dime packages, I think this was a really good pick. Fitzpatrick was the first pick that I didn't really like, and it's only a C-, so it's not like I hated it. But to me, Jalen Darden and Tylan Wallace were just way better receiver prospects, and you wouldn't have needed to trade up to get them. Rashad Weaver is sort of a similar situation as Elijah Molden, where I felt like they were being projected to go like one round too early. So a lot of people had Weaver as an early third round guy, which I just thought was too high for someone who was 24 and not that explosive. But getting an NFL ready pass rusher at the end of the fourth to me is really good value. Even if he doesn't end up being great, he can give you starting caliber play as an edge defender and maybe keep Landry from having to play 1,000 snaps every season. Racy McMath and Brady Breeze are both going to be C's. Maybe I should have gone with a C+ for Breeze, but it's just hard for me to see either of these guys making that big of an impact, which really isn't expected from 6th round picks. If you look up any draft class and look at all the 6th and 7th round picks, you'd be amazed at how few names you actually recognize. So most guys on day 3 aren't really making an impact. My overall grade for Tennessee's draft is an A-, and the grade is pretty heavily weighted towards the top 100 picks because that's where you really expect to find starting caliber players. My only issue is how they addressed receiver, but sometimes the board just falls that way. I know there was a really big run on receivers leading up to the Monty Rice pick. The final thing I want to do before we get into the undrafted free agents is NFL comparisons for the Titans draft picks. And pro comps are kind of dumb, but I think they're fun to do, so I'm going to do them. And these are more trying to compare play style and scheme fit and strengths and weaknesses, that sort of thing, than it is comparing how good I think these players are. For Caleb Farley, my high-end comp is Patrick Peterson and my low-end is Fabian Moreau. I think if you take injuries out of the equation, even if Caleb Farley doesn't end up developing that well, I think he has a pretty high floor just because of his athleticism. My comp for Dylan Radins is Brian O'Neill, sort of that lighter offensive tackle that's really good run blocking in a zone blocking scheme. Monty Rice, I have the high end as Quan Alexander and the low end is Christian Kirksey, sort of a smaller off-ball linebacker that doesn't really let his lack of size become that big of a weakness, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. Elijah Molden, I have Desmond King as the high end, Corn Elder as the low end. I think Elijah Molden is a bit better in zone coverage than man coverage, and I think he's really solid as a run defender as well. Des Fitzpatrick was a tough one to come up with, so I stole this comp from the Draft Network, I think it was. But Zach Pascal, I think, is the best comp that I've seen for Des Fitzpatrick. A taller receiver that's a really good run blocker, runs a lot of go routes, a lot of curl routes, but isn't really that shifty, doesn't have a lot of suddenness to his game. My comp for Rashad Weaver is Danico Autry, just because I see both of them as being a sort of edge interior defensive lineman hybrid. They both have really good length and aren't really that explosive. Racy McMath, the high end is DK Metcalf, the low end is Justin Hunter, kind of just stiff, fast receivers that are really only going to be vertical threats. And for Racy McMath, it's just all going to be determined by whether or not he can develop into a good route runner. And then Brady Breeze, my comp is Tashawn Gibson as kind of a positionless secondary player that doesn't have great size, doesn't have great athleticism, but has really good instincts as far as pass coverage goes. The first UDFA I want to talk about is really the only player I see making any sort of notable impact, and that's tight end Briley Moore out of Kansas State. Moore was one of my favorite sleepers in this class regardless of position. I really liked him as a day 3 pick if someone like Tommy Tremble was off the board. He's 6'4", ran a 4.6, and had really good numbers in the vertical and broad jump. His only real issue as far as athletic testing is that he has really short arms, which for a tight end could cause issues as far as blocking and contested catches, but it just wasn't a problem that showed up on his film at all. And outside of arm length and the fact that he's a redshirt senior, there's really nothing about Briley Moore that makes me think he shouldn't have gotten drafted. The first thing that stands out with Briley Moore is that he's a phenomenal run blocker. In 2020, he had a 74.1 run blocking grade according to PFF, which was 12th highest among Power 5 tight ends. And it's not just that he's big and willing to be physical in the run game, he has really good technique as far as pad level and footwork. And given that Tennessee doesn't have any tight ends on the roster who are proven run blockers, it wouldn't surprise me to see Briley Moore actually be the one that takes over Jonnu Smith's role eventually, and Firkser can continue to play as a sort of slot H-back hybrid. That's not to say that Moore would be starting over Firkser, because Tennessee runs the most 2 tight end sets in the NFL, so they would both be on the field a lot. But looking at Tennessee's recent history of developing later drafted tight ends, I think Moore has a good shot at being a contributor. As a receiver, Briley Moore plays really fast and has reliable hands. It's hard to really evaluate college tight ends because a lot of times they get targeted like 1 or 2 times a game, but I think Moore could develop into a really dynamic receiving threat, and he actually offers something as a route runner, which not a lot of tight ends do. The rest of the UDFAs won't get nearly as much discussion because Moore was the only guy I really liked, so we'll kind of breeze through the rest of them. Miller Forrestall is pretty much just a guy at tight end. He has solid hands, he's not very athletic, and he's okay as a blocker, but nothing special, so I don't really see him as more than a practice squad guy. Naquan Jones is someone who I could actually see making the team, but that's just because he's the only nose tackle on Tennessee's roster at the moment. He gets pushed off the line of scrimmage way too often for someone who's 320 pounds, and when you look at older players like this, it's not a great sign if they still need a lot of physical development. He doesn't offer anything as a pass rusher. Michigan State pretty much always took him off the field in pass rushing situations, and the only real strength to Naquan Jones' game is his length, which makes him pretty good at shedding blocks when he's able to stay upright. Nose tackle is a position where there's always a lot of solid options late into the offseason, so it wouldn't surprise me if Tennessee added a veteran here. Chandon Herring is an offensive lineman out of BYU who played sort of all over the offensive line, mostly on the interior, but he definitely projects as a tackle given his size. He's really explosive and has good anchor and pass protection, but his technique is kind of all over the place, and again, it's hard to project a ton of development out of 25-year-olds. Justice Reed is an edge rusher out of Virginia Tech who played 6 seasons of college football and was pretty productive this past season, but just doesn't have any athletic traits that will really help him in the NFL. The main thing he has going for him is his hand usage, but he doesn't have a good first step, he doesn't have any bend, and his length is just okay, so it's hard to see him really making much of an impact. And then the last UDFA I'm going to talk about is Cole Banwart, who's kind of an interesting offensive lineman. He's under 300 pounds, so I was assuming he'd be one of these athletic zone blockers without much power, but he's kind of the opposite. He has a really good anchor and pass pro, and he was a lot better blocking on gap runs where the guy he was blocking was right in front of him. He was just never really able to be that successful reach blocking because he's not that explosive out of his stance. So I hope you guys have enjoyed these draft videos. Hopefully they've given you a good idea of what to expect from the rookie class. Now that we're finished with the draft, I'll be getting back into film rooms on current Titans players, and I want to do as many of those as possible before the season starts. And if you like my film breakdowns, subscribe to my channel and follow me on Twitter as well.